All right, everybody. Today we are here with Mr. John Vogel. How are you doing?
Great, Nico. How are you, man?
Doing great. Today we're just going to talk about some of the other rosters in the NFC compared to the Rams. Kind of a little compare contrast. We're going to look at the Packers and the Eagles roster, both playoff teams, along with the Rams. They're all second in their division. And we're just going to see where they're stacking up for next year. So we'll start off with the Rams. I think that this is a pretty interesting group. Obviously, you lose Aaron Donald, you lose, the main anchor of that defense for such a long time. And they bring in just a bunch of defensive line help in the draft to kind of fill that void. Like, what do you think of this roster so far?
Well, I thought it was a great idea to go out and draft, two Florida State guys that are very familiar with each other to start off. You know, um, Jared Verse in the first round, and then following up with Braden Fisk in the second. These are guys that had synergy and they understand each other, how they play the game, and so that made a lot of sense. Now, the second part is when you hear that they want to build these pods, essentially these groups of players that play together and build that chemistry together and sort of tag team this replacement for Aaron Donald, made a lot of sense. Why you would go get a couple guys that already have that chemistry with each other. Um, if you look at what Kobe Turner and Byron Young were also able to do last year, working together, they created a lot of havoc. And I think Kobe ended up leading the team in sacks, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah, I think he was about
as a
9.
rookie, right, as a rookie. So, now you got Byron Young and you're adding all these weapons and you need to get after the quarterback. That's the number one rule in the NFL at this day and time, and create that pressure. So I liked that. I do think that they are a little short when you start to get into the offensive line. And I think there's still a lot of questions here.
Mhm.
Logan Bruss, that's a guy that he's a very interesting prospect, but he had some concerns when he was in school. Mike McAllister, KT Levelston, these are guys that are rotational at best at this point. They need to develop a little bit. And, with John Jackson and his injury history, I think that's kind of a question that was left unanswered. So the interior of the offensive line, you hope that holds up over the course of the season. And then, but everywhere else, I would say they look pretty darn good. It's a fun roster.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think kind of like you said, the interior of that offensive line, you got like two of their best offensive linemen, Steve Avila and Kevin Dotson, kind of holding down the middle right there. But when you look at kind of the depth behind them, that was the problem when, the 20, was it the 22 season when just all the offensive line was just decimated. And then you saw that just
Hmm.
affected the rest of their offense. So then I think that was a little bit of an interesting choice not to kind of, develop. I know Logan Bruss is still trying to develop a little bit more of his game, but I think their depth at all the positions is a little shaky here and there. I also think someplace that could use a little bit more depth is just linebacker. Like you don't look at the linebacker group and are that like intimidated because when Ernest Jones comes off the field, there's no one on the roster that really just like pops out to me in my opinion.
He might be a year or two away, but Omar Spates could be that guy. Spates was awesome when he was at Oregon State. He had a good year at LSU. He's a little bit undersized. That's probably why he doesn't get drafted. But I didn't think Roseboom was that bad. And Troy Reader has played a lot of different roles in this defense over time. He's played that outside linebacker role, moved inside, and held down the fort through injury. So Reader, I think, while he's not Ernest Jones, I think that he's a capable player off of the edge for sure.
I mean, if you ask Rams fans, I think all they'll tell you about him is that he just looks so confused in coverage all the time. But I think that they're in okay hands. Otherwise, I would say the main two positions that need a little bit more depth would be just like linebacker and then, like you said, offensive line. But I think the biggest question on offense is just Tyler Higbee. Like when he's probably out for majority of the season, who's going to
Mhm.
step up? Is it going to be Parkinson? Is it going to be Davis Allen? Maybe Hunter Long? Who knows?
I think it'll be Parkinson, and he's not going to be able to impact the game as a receiver. None of those guys strike you as players that are going to be able to impact the game as a receiver. But if you're looking for a guy that'll step on the field and be that guy, that option out of the slot, maybe a bigger target, that'd be Jordan Whittington. but he's not going to be an inline tight end. He's going to be a guy that's going to be outside, whether that's in the slot or going, all the way to the boundary. But Whittington is a guy that he's very physical and more than capable receiver through contact. I don't think you're going to get that from Colby Parkinson. You're not going to get that from Allen. You're certainly not going to get that from Long. So I think if Higbee's going to miss, extended time, you're going to have to basically be comfortable with the thought that your tight end isn't going to be as involved in the receiving game as they would be with Higbee, and that they're going to be primarily a blocker. And for some people that makes them nervous, but especially nowadays when we have all the top teams in the NFL right now are running 12 personnel more than anybody in the league because of the mismatch opportunities that it creates. That's one thing also I think the Rams don't have compared to what other teams are trying to build is that opportunity to be very multiple out of their different sets. Think about a 12 personnel setup where you try a running back out there or even the 22. There's teams right now that can throw 22 out there. When you're a defense, how do you defend against 22 when you got two of those running backs that are receivers that can line up wide and run routes? You got a tight end that can be a wide receiver as well. How do you defend against that? Well, how do you match against that? Because they could very well line up in a tight formation, run the ball down your throat. And if you're light, they're going to get 6 yards. But if they line up and they go into an 11 type formation where they're three wide with a running back and a tight end matched up with one of their receivers, what do? That's not how the Rams are built. They're built more in the, what we've seen traditionally in the last 10 years in the league, which is heavy 11, which is one running back, one tight end. We're going to use our running back as a weapon out of the backfield. It can also run the ball. And, they've made a habit out of drafting a running back every single year. And that's to keep their rotation and their depth there at the running back position. But, this team's built around Cooper Kupp. It's built around now Puka Nacua stepping up into that role. Those types of players that are going to, line up in that 11 personnel and run the different, mismatch man beater, zone beater schemes that, the Shanahan and the McVays of the world have come to run.
Yeah, totally agree. I think somehow I didn't realize this a while back, but Higbee is the tight end receiving yard leader for the Rams. Despite I feel like he only gets like around 500 to like 600 yards a year and like a couple touchdowns here and there, but he's just been so consistent his entire career. He's mostly been used as a blocker. And I think everyone that's played fantasy football remembers that like couple game stretch at the end of like 2019ish where he was just getting touchdowns galore with Gerald Everett out. So I think that if someone can get just like at least like a 500-yard production, that'll pretty much match his production from the receiving end of it. But then you look at
Yeah,
the running backs.
I don't think you have a 500-yard production guy here. Is what I'm saying. I think you've got if you have to play half a season, if you can get 20 catches out of one of these guys, you're in really good shape.
So maybe they're just trying to shift to a little bit more tight end by committee, just like the running backs have been going. They're just cycling out those guys every so often to see who kind of catches fire. I know Davis Allen had a little bit of trouble last year with some crucial drops.
Mm-hmm.
And then
He has
looking at
most of his career too. So
yeah. And then looking at the running back position, I think it was really interesting you mentioned kind of catching, passes out of the backfield. I don't really think that's either of their guys' game, except for Boston Scott, I feel like was the only guy that's kind of known for that. Blake Corum and Kyron Williams weren't really known, I feel like, for receiving as much as they are for just pure running, right?
Kyron, I think, was a pretty darn productive receiver last year, if I'm remembering correctly. And Blake wasn't asked to do it much when he was at Michigan. Obviously, as a rookie, we don't really know, but he can definitely do it. I'm taking a look here. So Williams in 12 games caught 32 passes, 206 yards and 3 touchdowns, which he had the 2 touchdown receiving game. He caught 6 for 61 against Arizona. He can definitely catch out of the backfield. Yes, you want to use him as a runner, but he does offer that threat as that check down weapon. Blake can do that as well. Blake's a little bit better of a route runner. And Boston, yeah, definitely is a full on, receiver out of the backfield, essentially, is what he is. Very familiar with him. We had him in Philadelphia for a few years. Absolutely loved him up there. So but that's where he does his damage is, you don't have a Darren Sproles here. by any means, but you have guys that are more than capable that can absolutely do that. And then Blake too. Blake's going to bring pass protection to this offense because Blake was really good in pass protection at Michigan, which is surprising because he's smaller. But there's some reps that you put on the tape and you watch him stonewall some big giant linebackers. He's got no business stonewalling, and you realize that he is really a three down running back and can bring a little bit of everything to the game.
Yeah, how did you feel about that comparison a lot of people were making when they kind of said like, oh, they drafted basically like the same exact type of running back? Do you feel like that's the case? And then do you kind of see like the other NFL teams catching on and saying like they're drafting the same style of running back so they're already like starter?
I could see it a little bit, but that's everybody's got his particular type that they like. It's very rare that you find even with groups that try to be dynamic with their runners, you want them all to be the same because you want to be able to run the same offense when they're all on the field. You know, there's a few exceptions to that rule. If you looked at what the Titans did for years and years with Derrick Henry, there's not another Derrick Henry. You can't really find another clone of his laying around. So, the 49ers have always liked guys that are in that 5'11", 215 range that can be receivers out of the backfield, but they have that specific type. They have that body type that they like and the skill set that they like. So most people try to stick with that so that you don't have to change your offense when the running back rotates off the field. Yeah, they are similar, but like I said, Blake is an awesome pass protector. That's something Kyron doesn't really bring, nor does Ronnie. Boston definitely can't. But Blake's going to be able to do a little bit of everything and probably ends up playing a little more than anybody anticipates. Um, Kyron, very explosive runner, obviously loved him when he came out of Notre Dame, but that's a guy that he's not going to be that pass protector. And so when you get into a third down crucial situation, or maybe you've got a fox protect out of the backfield, which is you're looking real quick to make sure that all the defenders are picked up before you run your route. I'm going to want Blake Corum there out of anybody. So Blake probably plays a little bit more than people realize at this point.
Let's shout it out. What's your prediction percentage wise? We talking 70-30? We looking at like a 50-50 close?
Well, we're
What do you
probably
think?
talking 60-40. It's probably going to be 60-40
60-40?
while they're both healthy. That's going to be another
Yeah.
aspect here because Kyron only played 12 games last year. Blake has had his issues with injuries in the past. So that those guys are probably not going to be healthy the entire year, especially 17 games is a lot to ask out of a running back. But that's what I would venture to say is it'd probably be, while they're both healthy, 60-40.
Okay. I think we can move on to our next roster here. We can just cut this part out. I'm still learning how to do this. Let's go there and then there.
Maybe. We'll see.
Wait,
Oh, no, the Rams still.
that was the Rams again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we might have it here. Okay, there we go.
Here we go.
All right, moving on to your favorite team, the Eagles. How do
Mm-hmm.
you kind of feel about these guys, without Jason Kelsey? I know people have said good things about Cam Jurgens. I know that also, like, they're also a really motivated team at the end of the year, I heard, kind of from listening to New Heights. Shout out New Heights.
Mm-hmm. I think, first off, the hire of Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator is going to be a huge key to this defense and how they're going to produce this year. I think that's a big, big, big circle that right there because if you look at Vic Fangio over his career, the Miami defense last year played well, didn't play up to his standards, but it was the first time in his career I think he's had a lot of pushback. When you look at the players that kind of stood up and had issues with the way that he coached and him being hard. No, Philadelphia, this group right here wants to be coached hard. They want guys that are the coaches that are going to come in here and are going to tell them like it is and really force them, push them to be much better than they are. And that's Vic. Vic will never lie to you. Vic is going to shoot you straight the entire time. And he's one of the most innovative defensive coordinators in football. In fact, there's two schools of thought that we run primarily. that's one of those schools of thought stems from Fangio's work, really, over the course of his career. So Fangio's a great defensive coordinator, so that's going to be huge to really unlock the pieces to this defense and get them into the position where they need. That's the first thing. Um, Obviously, they answered a lot of their questions. So the running back position totally got reshuffled. Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is the only guy that returns who was there last year. But they went out. They got Saquon Barkley. They went and got Will Shipley out of Clemson, in the fourth round. So it's a good running back room now, and you know that if Barkley does go down, he's had injury history, over the course of his career. You feel good about Kenneth Gainwell and Shipley being able to carry that load. At the receiver position, Adam Paris Campbell is going to be interesting to see how he fits in. That was kind of one of the weak points. I think if you wanted to point to a weak point on the offense, was that they didn't have a true number three. So Paris is going to kind of hopefully be that number three. They've got a lot of options that they can rotate through. Obviously, Anaya Smith, very explosive slot type receiver, and then Johnny Wilson's the complete opposite. He's a huge, mismatch freak. So, if you can get those guys involved and get them involved early, this offense, the passing game, really starts to get rolling. Tight end looks good, just like it did last year. Uzomah's a nice little addition. Calcaterra held up well last year when he's had to play. And then, so there's a lot of depth there. Yes, you're going to miss Kelsey because Kelsey did so much at the line of scrimmage. The way he could read, defensive schemes and set the protection, took a lot off of Jalen Hurts' plate. But for Cam Jurgens, he was drafted for this. If Cam can't hold it up, you've got another guy. I know that the depth chart says Dylan McMahon, but Landon Dickerson will move to center before they play Dylan McMahon, and Cam Jurgens will shift over to left guard. So those guys are interchangeable. If you have an injury to Cam Jurgens, Dickerson can fill in that spot, and you still feel good about the depth that you have. So I like where this offensive line's headed. They've got, Lane Johnson on the outside. You had Mekhi Becton, who's if you wanted to say a style similar to Johnson, I think that they kind of are similar. Johnson's obviously had injury history here recently as well. So you had to make sure that you had a backup right tackle. They took care of that. And then when you look at the defense, what was the big concern last year? The secondary. The secondary was the big concern. Slay got hurt, and that's when things started to fall apart on the back end. Bradbury couldn't hold up. So you go out, you get, Quinyon Mitchell, you get Cooper DeJean, in the draft in just the first couple rounds, first couple picks that you take, and you really solidify it and get CJ Gardner-Johnson back too. So I think that they got a whole lot better this offseason. And this is a team that they're going to compete in the NFC East. They've really got the Cowboys gunning for them. They've got the firepower now to match what the Cowboys are going to bring to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, the secondary was their biggest concern, and they addressed that immediately in the draft. I think they also kind of added some really interesting depth free agents. Like you look at Uzama, like you said, Paris Campbell, just guys that aren't really going to be that big of an impact. But if you look at their depth and just their contributions that way, I feel like it's pretty big for them as well.
Yeah, because it allows you to be multiple, right? So I got Paris Campbell, who I can put in the backfield, and I can like I was talking about rolling out 22 personnel and running an 11 type formation. Well, now I can roll out 12 personnel and then run a 22 formation. Two running backs in the backfield with two tight ends, and Paris Campbell being one of the running backs because he's that type of body, he's that type of skill set. And then Uzama is your 12. He solidifies your 12 personnel anytime you got two tight ends on the field. He's a great tight end too. Calcaterra could be a great tight end too as well. So if you've got an injury, you feel really good about the depth there because Goddard did miss a few games last year. And depth is where you start to see things. This team right here is about as close as they were to the 2017 team that Philadelphia had in terms of depth. And just having pieces, it looks like they've got a card for everything that could go wrong. There's an answer that's going to be suitable. So it's all up to these guys to hold it together. But the depth is extremely, extremely impressive across the board.
Yeah. I think as well as adding a guy like Devin White on defense, I feel like people aren't talking about that as much as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got Nakobe Dean and Devin White projected their starters, but Jeremiah Trotter, is a really solid addition as well. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Obviously, his dad played for the Eagles for a long time, so it was a little bit of a legacy pick. Felt very sweet. And then Van Sumer and Owen Burks, those are guys that if they have to play for a little while, they're going to hold up the interior of that defense really well.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do that, and then I'm gonna throw up at the end. We're gonna go throw up the list of free agents. And we're gonna say who we think should be one free agent signing for each team,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll be over. Now we got the Packers.
And that's all assuming, of course, they come at a reasonable cost because that's
That
at
too.
this point in the season, that's usually the holdup.
Yeah, because I all these guys are like real vets, and they're on Spot Rack. It was saying their like annual value is 29 million a year
Mm-hmm.
for Ryan Tannehill. For I don't think anyone wants to pay that.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So moving on to the Packers. Packers obviously made the playoffs, went and just beat the Cowboys to a pulp. And then here we are in the offseason for them. They're looking pretty good on both sides, I feel like. They added a couple pieces here and there. And Josh Jacobs, obviously, on the offense, got rid of Aaron Jones for some strange reason. I'm not sure why, but I feel pretty good about the Packers, and it looked like Jordan Love was doing really great last year. Like he kind of caught fire at the right time, and so did the whole rest of the team.
Yeah, Jordan obviously was able to take those few years under Aaron Rodgers and turn it into something that really, really became special. Um, he's obviously developed really well while he hasn't played, and definitely looks like he could be the quarterback for the Packers for the next 10 years. I don't think anybody's too worried about that. In fact, they've gone they're very young in their quarterback room with Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt now. So if there's one critique to the depth, it's that they don't have an older veteran guy there to kind of help keep Love in check. But as you start to look at the rest of the roster, the receivers, extremely young group, but very talented, very deep across the board. They've done an excellent job drafting. Everybody that they've drafted has been an impact player for them at some point already in their career. The tight ends are looking very strong as well, and Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, both guys that they went and drafted in the same year. And then when you look at the offensive line, you know, there's decent depth here as well. Adding Jordan Morgan gives you a real swing player that you can plug in at tackle, guard, or even center in a pinch if you had to. Um, there's good players across this board that the Packers have to mess with their offense, and I think you see them move on from Aaron Jones because Josh Jacobs fits AJ Dillon's skill set a little bit better. They knew that they were going to have to let one of those two go with the money that they were going to have to pay out, and they decided to keep Dillon probably because they knew they could get Jacobs, and so they want to be a little bit more physical, a little bit more downhill. Whereas Jones is a little bit more of that speed guy, that receiver out of the backfield, that guy that needs that outside zone to be successful. He's not as effective in between the tackles, but that's just body type, body size. So Jacobs, a little bit more of that grinder, fits Dillon's skill set better. I think that's why you saw them do that. You get down here to the defense, and they're going to have some. They've got really good depth on their defensive line as well. This is a group that can rotate and not feel a whole lot of difference as they rotate through these players. Their 3 deep right now looks really good. You know that they're not going to be able to keep all those guys on the active 45, but there's a lot of good talent there. When you get the linebacker group, they did a great job. Getting Quay Walker last year, he stepped up. McDuffie's come out of nowhere over the last couple years, developed into a decent starter, but then adding Cooper to secure that middle in the draft this year. Cooper was arguably the best linebacker in this class. And you got him, or the Packers got him at a really good place. So they got a starter. That kind of solidifies that group. if there's one place that you want to kind of criticize, it's probably that strong side linebacker in McDuffie, who is a capable starter. Tyron Hopper behind him, not very proven. Same with Aaron Mosby. Mosby's, I think, is brand new. Came out of Fresno State. These guys are. It's a young, unproven group outside of Duffy, and Duffy, I think, has had his injury concerns going back to even his time in college. So that's probably your one concern. But if that's your one concern on your defense, then you're doing pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, I think a lot of these guys, like even myself looking at this roster, I don't feel like a lot of them are household names. I feel like really the only popular, like really trendy players on the defense are like, Xavier McKinney, you got, Rashawn Gary, even just some of those guys that just haven't really made like a real star name for themselves in the league. But if you look at the way that they play hard, they play physical, and they play really well all
Hmm.
together just as one. Like you said, this is a very young team. I think even the wide receiver room, like all those guys are drafted within the last like about 1-2 years, right? So all of those
Yeah,
guys kind of had the time to develop with Jordan Love, which I think is really great for them because they can kind of learn from each other as they go. So when you look at the Packers for next year, I mean, the NFC North, Vikings are probably not going to be as good. Maybe with JJ McCarthy, probably about a 9-win team. So they're pretty much just competing with the Lions for first place. Same thing with the Bears. The Bears and the Vikings, I feel like are going to be at the same win range, but I feel like they're kind of just
it's a
competing for first
it's going to be a
place.
brutal division in the NFC North. That is going to be a bloodbath. Let me tell you. Um,
Yeah, those division games are definitely going to be something to watch for next year because you got two rookie quarterbacks, then you got two playoff quarterbacks last year.
and I was on a Bears podcast last week, and I told them, a successful year for you guys is to find a way to win two division games. To go 2-4 in
Yeah,
the division. If you go 3-3, you're in the playoffs. But I don't think you're going to beat Detroit. You did it last year, but I'm not going to expect that. You can't. You got to find a way to beat Green Bay once and Minnesota once. And if you can sweep Minnesota, then great. Then you're in really good shape. But it's a brutal division over there. When you look at it, like even Detroit getting the number one seed is very unlikely if they can win their division again, because the likelihood that they're 4-2 in their division is very, very legitimate, and they're going to play first division winners across the rest of the conference. So if Detroit can get out of you know their regular season 12-5, that's a phenomenal year for them. Um,
yeah,
it's going to be brutal. It's going to be absolutely brutal across that entire division right there.
yeah. And then when these teams play each other, since they're all second place teams, they're going to be playing each other this next season. Who do you think will win out of these matchups? So Rams, Packers, Rams, Eagles, and Eagles, Packers.
I think that the Packers are in a really good position right now with the way that their depth is. Now everybody's gonna expect it to take another step. If they take that next step, they'll sweep these games. Packers will. Philadelphia has to have that defense come together this year. If Philadelphia has the defense come together, they'll sweep these games. They'll win the NFC East. For the Rams, I think what you need to have is, first off, people have got to stay healthy. Matthew Stafford's got to stay healthy. That's going to be the next thing too. You know, he had all the arm concerns over the last couple of years. People worried about his elbow, um, and it just him holding up. He's starting to get into that part of his career where we expect these quarterbacks to make it to 40, 41, 42 because we watch Peyton Manning and Tom Brady do it, but not every quarterback can do that. We can't
Yeah,
expect that. So that's a concern. But as long as they stay healthy and they play up exactly the way that you anticipate them to, those pods really come together. That's how they sweep these games. Realistically, I think the Rams probably could take down the Eagles. And if things realistically at this point, in this moment of time, I'd say the Eagles are probably the weakest of the three. And then I would say the Packers are probably the strongest. So I would say Packers probably 2-0, Eagles 0-2, Rams split at 1-1.
that seems very fair to me. Yeah, I totally agree. I think kind of like we said, like the Packers, they don't, have that many like star players like the rest of the league, but they play all together like really well as a team. and I think
And
that it's
these
a
aren't
really great idea. It
you
was a
don't
really
really
great
have a
idea.
weak point.
Yeah, that as well. They're kind
That's
of
the
just like
thing.
really well rounded.
Yeah, so and even when you get into the two deep, we talk about Lucas Van Ness. This guy never started a game at Iowa. He very well may never start a game in the NFL, but he comes off the bench as part of that rotation, and he's a freak of nature trying to deal with him. Paul Brooks is an incredible pass rusher up the interior. It's just a guy that when you ask him to gap shoot, he gets the job done. He did it at Bowling Green. He did it last year in his rookie year when he played in, his limited time. Like there's talent deep on this team, and so the difference I think is from the Packers and the other two teams we've looked at, when you go to their two deep, the difference, the drop off in the talent from their first line to their second line is very, very minimal. When you look at the other two teams, there is a drop off there. You can see it, so
Mhm.
just looking at the names that's not even putting the teams on the field. You'll see it immediately as soon as it goes on the field. But the Packers have done such a good job making sure that they have the depth so that they can run their rotations. They can make sure everybody's getting a breather, and there's not a lot of difference. There's not a lot of drop off between the talent that's there.
Yeah, and then to kind of finish us off here, what do you think each out of all the free agents, what do you think each team should sign? You can go first, then I'll finish us off. Just kind of looking at this list here.
Well, it's kind of hard because you want to look at guys that first off are going to take a team friendly deal. That's kind of a problem at this point. The guys know that they can kind of hold out and wait for somebody to get hurt and get a payday out of it.
Mhm.
Not to make it sound insensitive or anything, but that's really what it is. But so this next thing is, are you really getting an upgrade from any of these guys? Right. That's why they're
Yeah.
still free agents because that's the team. That's what teams are kind of sitting there. Does he really give us that much of an upgrade over the next, line of the next player that we have? But I
Yeah.
think if
I think if
I'm
you look at their ages too, they're all in their like 30s. They're all old guys that
Mhm.
are pretty much left at this point.
One guy I might look at if I'm the Rams, just to add a little more depth to the secondary and bolster things up, is Micah Hyde. That'd be a guy that I'd look at. Um, if I'm the Eagles, I feel really good, really about everything up to this point, and it's just sort of that freak injury that I'm going to sign somebody. But if I had to pick one, I might say we could probably upgrade what we have in um, Reed Blankenship with someone like a Jamal Adams or somebody like that. That is, if Jamal would take the right deal. So that's what we kind of have to assume. And then with Green Bay, if I just wanted to get richer, I'd probably go and grab, Yannick Ngagwe and say, I'll just rotate him on the other side. Once we pull our starters off, we'll put Lucas Van Ness on one side and Ngagwe on the other and just let him go.
Yeah. For myself, I would probably say Yannick Ngakoue for the Rams because I feel like all of the guys in our kind of defensive line room. I know some might say we don't need like any more defensive line help, but all of our guys are pretty young. Like like we said, Fisk and
Hmm.
Verse they just came in this year. Bobby Brown's fairly young. I think he was 2020 ish, 2020 drafts. So I think adding kind of a veteran to like, the Aaron Donald type that will be able to teach them some, moves or just be that veteran presence in the locker room. They don't really have that much of a veteran presence in the locker room on the defensive line. So adding a guy like even a Carl Lawson that'll be just somewhat of a
Hmm.
veteran presence. And then for the Eagles, yeah, like you said, I think even Quandre Diggs, I feel like might take a deal for them. And then for the Packers, I would have to go with probably Gilmore, I feel like would want to play for them in the secondary, but that would be a
Hmm.
nasty secondary if they get a guy like Gilmore. And even if
And
these guys
Gilmore
just sign
still
for like,
played well last year.
yeah,
That's the thing with Gilmore. He played really well last year too.
I think even if these guys sign for just like vet men and they just go and be veteran presence, be teachers and be willing to kind of impart their knowledge up onto the younger guys, I feel like that would just be great for both parties.
Yeah,
All right.
and that's kind of what teams are waiting on at this point, right, of the year is are these guys going to take a deal that we can afford, or are they going to hold out and wait until, you know, there's an injury, something happens, and now we have to pivot and create a new plan.
Yeah. So that'll do us for today. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course, dude. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time.